Today we are going to focus on island cheeses. My name is Julia. I'm the owner of Fromage Kitchen, and I'm very excited about today's topic because it's very near and dear to my heart because I've traveled to a lot of these places, and I'm excited to share with you a few traditional recipes that I found along the way to highlight these beautiful cheeses. And if you have any questions during the presentation, you can always feel free to pop in, unmute yourself. We're very casual here, so feel free to just jump in with any questions that you may have. Alternatively, you can also use the chat box. You'll see Morgan is here. She does all of our media for Fromage Kitchen, and if I don't happen to see the question come in on the chat box, she'll read it out for me so I don't miss it. So without further ado, we are going to get started. So you received 4 cheeses today, and the topic was island cheese, which is a pretty broad topic, but we wanted to keep it kind of specific to kind of Mediterranean islands and Mediterranean environments to showcase how these areas of the world, which are very dependent on the sea and isolated from other places, how that can shape the cheese-making culture. And so we've highlighted 4 cheeses today. The first is halloumi, and the second will be feta. The feta from the island of Lesbos. And then next up, we're going to do calcagno, which is the Sardinian sheep smoked cheese. And then last but not least, we're going to be doing mahon, which comes from Minorca in Spain, an island off of Spain. So hopefully you have all those in front of you. And today is going to be a little bit different because earlier this evening, I filmed a few videos showing some traditional preparations of these products. And so we'll play those so that you can get a sense of how you can enjoy these at home. And then also, before we get started with the cheeses, I want to highlight the condiment that we included because it's very, very special. So this is from the island of Chios in Greece. And it's by the company. The company name is Citrus, which can be confusing sometimes. But it's because the island of Chios is known for their citrus fruits. So they named their company Citrus. And this is a rose petal spoon sweet. And what a spoon sweet is, it's very traditional in Greece where they take some sort of item, whether it's fresh pistachio or rose petal or figs or orange peel, and they submerge it in a syrup. And so in this case, it's a rose petal immersed in syrup, and it is just a really, really beautiful accompaniment to a lot of the cheeses. You'll find rose is a very commonly used ingredient in the Mediterranean. It's a very hardy plant, and it provides a ton of natural flavoring. And so you'll see it frequently in desserts, in syrups, in jams. Less common in the United States, but it's a really, really beautiful product that I'm excited for you to try. All right, so we are going to start with halloumi, which comes from the island of Cyprus. So I was hopefully everybody has does everybody have a split screen up so they can see the photos that we're sharing? If you have any trouble, just give us a shout. So Cyprus. You see it? Okay, great. So Cyprus is an island off of Greece, and I really wanted to explore Cyprus. So Cyprus is unique because there is the Greek portion of Cyprus, which is the majority of the island and more the southern part, and then the Turkish side. It has a very unique culture. It is one of the more fascinating islands I've ever been to. A very remote, very independent. When you look at Cyprus on a map, it really is very, very far away from Greece, which is like the primary country that it represents. And it has retained a lot of its own unique culture. And what I found interesting was almost a sense of isolationism. And I saw that as well when I was visiting Crete, where you see more traditional recipes. And this goes back to island cheeses, where there's not as much exposure to other recipes, ingredients, traditions. And so you actually you're able to retain a lot of traditional methods, whether it's cheese making, ingredients. And so I visited this. One of my goals has always been to import a very traditional halloumi. Halloumi can only be from the island of Cyprus by EU regulations. And it can be it can be sheep's milk, it can be goat's milk, it can be a blend. What you have tonight is sheep's milk. The farm that I visited is goat's milk. And what surprised me was that on the island itself, goat's milk was much more prevalent as a halloumi ingredient than sheep's milk. But in the United States, it's almost exclusively sheep's milk. And so when I spoke with a lot of these cheesemakers about the idea of importation, or on their part, exporting, it was one of the hardest asks I think I've encountered. We work with tiny producers all over the world who just sell at their local markets. So it's not uncommon to get a little bit of sort of resistance to the idea of exporting, because it seems like this very daunting, scary thing. What was fascinating about Cyprus was that it was coupled with a astonishing sense of independence and gosh, how do I even describe it? Independence and almost stubbornness, and not stubbornness in a negative way at all. Because I can tell you, I'm very stubborn. My mom is very stubborn. And it was just sort of more of a matter of fact stubbornness, which I really appreciated, where they were just very content doing what they were doing at the scale that they were doing it at, and didn't necessarily understand why, we would be interested in having their cheese in the United States. They're like, well, you're here, so enjoy it while you're here. And that's that. But I had a fascinating time learning about the Cypriot goats, which you can see in the photo here, which are known for their very, very, very long ears. And they were very friendly and very sweet, and they made a beautiful, beautiful cheese.
Me.
Hi. Oh, hi. Oh, you're going to eat my phone, aren't you? What we did, so I went with Allison, who's our assistant general manager. And generally when we go on buying trips, in that case, we went to Athens for a food show. We always like to do a side excursion to learn more about the history and culture, food culture of an area that we haven't explored yet, or visit a producer that, we've either haven't visited in a long time or have never visited. For me, it's really important to maintain the curiosity and exploration of our job, so that we can continue to import exciting new products, or at very least, in the case of the halloumi, where it doesn't feel like we're going to be able to import goat's milk halloumi anytime soon, we can at least share the culture of, what they've been doing there and how they're preparing it. And so we learned from them how to traditionally fry halloumi in olive oil. So this is what I did earlier today. So you can see my sister is visiting from Seattle. And so she helped me film, and we're going to be enjoying this right after the video. But it's super, super simple. And I'm going to pause for a second because what we did is we broke down the steps to how to fry the halloumi traditionally in olive oil. But before we start that video, I encourage you to, if you're planning on enjoying the halloumi tonight or within the next several days, I encourage you to try it fresh. You will taste the salinity and saltiness. And if anybody has had poutine or squeaky cheese or cheese curd, anything in that realm, it will be very reminiscent of that because it is such um, a fresh cheese that is drained quite well. And you basically retain a lot of the natural curd. And what's really beautiful that I learned in Cyprus is that nothing is wasted. No pun intended, because I'm going to be talking about whey. They use the whey to create a second cheese, a fresh cheese that is only really available in Cyprus because it's so fresh and it's almost like a yogurty like consistency, which is fascinating because a lot of times the whey is discarded or given to the animals to eat. So they've actually turned this byproduct into another beautiful cheese, which was really wonderful. And again, something that I would, that is the beauty of food, is that there are some things that are impossible to import and you just have to enjoy them at the place that they're at. But Morgan, if you want to go ahead, unless anybody has any questions before we get started on this fried halloumi. All right. All right, so we're going to cut this halloumi approximately pinky width into slices. And you want to cut it about this width because that's going to give it a nice even fry on either side. But then also, you're still going to get a nice soft texture on the inside. If you cut it too thin, you're going to end up with pretty tough cheese once you've fried it. If you cut it too thick, it's going to still have that sort of squeaky cheese center. It's totally edible to eat like this, but it's just a difference. It's not going to get sort of soft and unctuous if it's too thick. Okay, so we have our sliced halloumi. I'm going to get my pan hot. Now, you don't want to add any salt to this. All you're doing is frying it in olive oil. So you do want to get your pan. I've got a nice sort of thick bottomed copper pan, which works really well to retain the heat. I'm just using a little extra virgin olive oil. And you want, enough to coat the bottom of the pan. We're not frying it completely so that it's submerged in olive oil. But we do want to get enough oil so that you get a really, really nice fry because it will absorb some of the olive oil. I definitely recommend tasting the cheese on its own. You can taste the salt level. Once you fry it, it's actually going to tone down the salt level slightly, and that's why this cheese is so good fried or grilled and put on salads, because then it adds that sort of salty element. You want to make sure to keep an eye on your oil. You do not want it to start to smoke because at that point it's going to be burnt. So basically I'm just looking to heat it up, and it doesn't, that's perfect. You hear it sizzle. So I'm going to turn the heat down slightly. Now, over the years, I've cooked enough that I have almost no feeling in my hands. But for safety's sake, you're going to want to use a good pair of tongs, not your fingers. So this is the hard part, is to kind of ignore it for a bit, because what you want to do is you really want the cheese to brown naturally. So we're going to step back, watch it. Again, you want to make sure that it does not start to smoke and that the heat is not too high. Right now I'm on like a medium heat. And then I'll just peek at it every once in a while. The other tip that's really good to know when you're frying halloumi is halloumi often has a lot of moisture. And you can see right there, it's splattering a little bit. That's common when you basically are adding a higher moisture cheese to oil. So just be really careful. If you have a splatter guard, you can use a splatter guard. I actually have one in my dishwasher. Sometimes that's good if it starts to get a little bit crazy. It'll just protect you a bit. All right. All right, so we've let this go for a while, and you can actually see it start to brown coming up on the edges, and it should be very easy to flip. And so you get that gorgeous golden brown color. Now the whole point, if you fuss with this too early, that one's a little bit under, so I'm gonna switch places, get it right in the middle there, and let that go a little bit longer. If you fuss with it too early, it will stick to the bottom of the pan. If you don't fuss with it, that's how you're gonna get that sort of golden brown, easy to flip crust. So if you're struggling to flip it, it probably means that you need to actually leave it alone for a bit longer. Okay, so one thing you have to be careful of, we're gonna pull it off right now, which is actually, it cooks much faster on the second side than the first, because you've cooked some moisture out of the cheese. And also, when you put the cold cheese into the oil, it cools down the oil significantly. And so it does require some time for that cheese to heat back up. Or not the cheese, sorry, the olive oil to heat back up. But when you flip it, the oil is hot, the cheese is hot. So this is what you end up with. And so this is a perfect little snack. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a simple salad with Persian cucumbers and cherry tomatoes, and toss that in a little bit of olive oil, and then just top it with this, and it's just a perfect light salad. So that's one of my favorite ways to prepare halloumi. So that's halloumi. That's going to be my dinner later tonight, and hopefully you all can enjoy it as well. Halloumi is, because of the way they drain halloumi and press the curd, when you making cheese, the very, very first stage of cheese is the milk, of course. And then you need to separate the milk solids from the milk liquids, the curds from the whey. And so usually what you need to do is some sort of coagulant, whether that is citrus or a microbial rennet or a vegetable rennet like thistle, or an animal rennet. That will help coagulate the cheeses. So with a cheese like this, you are able to separate the curds from the whey. And as I mentioned, the whey is retained to make a separate type of cheese. And then the curd is salted and pressed and drained of a lot of its liquid. And it's actually a very similar method of a similar style of making cheese to the feta in a lot of ways. But it is, the feta you'll see is much less dense and much, the processing part afterwards where the feta is brined versus the halloumi not being, remaining in brine, for a long, long period of time changes that style of cheese. But halloumi is the perfect cheese for grilling, for frying. And it's just, I think it's once you start to really dig into it and discover it, it's such a lovely cheese. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right, so we're going to move on next to the feta. And similarly, so feta is, a cheese that everybody is familiar with. There is a lot of really bad feta out there, and there's some really exceptional feta out there. We decided to use feta from the island of Lesbos. And what's unique about this feta is it is made using native sheep from Lesbos and very traditional methods. The cheese is pasteurized and processed very delicately so that you retain a lot of the fattiness and the richness of the sheep's milk. When you're talking about milk types, sheep's milk has the highest fat content. So you end up with a really, really incredibly rich cheese without being too salty. So the way feta is processed It is not only salted after the curd and the whey is separated, but it is also brined in a saltwater solution. So sometimes when you get these mass-produced fetas, it can actually have a pretty pronounced, intensely salty flavor. When it's made really, really well, there's a balance. So it is definitely a cheese that has a pronounced saltiness, but it should also be tart and bright and creamy. And it shouldn't overwhelm you with the flavor of salt. And that's why I love this one so much. And I also created a short little recipe that I made growing up, actually, that I love to highlight the feta and let it really, really shine. So Morgan will play that next. So next up, we have feta, which is a cheese that I think a lot of people are familiar with. This is a really special feta from the island of Lesbos in Greece. And so what I want to show today is one of my favorite recipes that I actually used to make as a kid, which is just a gently baked feta. It's really good as an appetizer and a perfect way to showcase the cheese itself. A little bit about this cheese and what makes it so special. So Lesbos is an island in Greece, and this is made from a native breed of sheep in that region. So it's 100% sheep's milk. And what's unique about it is it's a PDO feta. It's a protected designation of origin feta. So whenever you see a Lesbos feta, that is PDO, it means that there are strict rules and regulations to how it is produced. This is done by third generation family, and it's made in a very traditional way using starter and a little bit of yogurt to start the culturing process, as well as adding in animal rennet, traditional rennet, and then salting the cheese and pressing the cheese. So what you end up with is just this beautiful, dense feta that's not too salty, but it holds its texture really, really nicely. It has a ton of flavor, and that's why I like to let it shine. One of my favorite ways to use feta is just on a Greek salad, which is just, again, a big hunk of feta, usually about this big, right on top of a pile of fresh cucumbers, tomatoes, and olives. No lettuce if you're going real traditional. And then, of course, some beautiful oregano from Greece, which we're going to talk about in a second. So because we're baking this, we want to make sure that the feta is thick enough, because we want to retain sort of that really nice, cool, fresh interior. So I always use my hands as good measuring guides. So this is going to be about a thumb width thick. And so you've got a nice block. And so right now it's just two of us, so that's going to be good. I'm going to save this block for later. And you'll notice that it comes in brine. The brine is just salt and water. And if you keep the feta covered, it is going to last much, much longer than if you drain the brine or replace it with fresh water. So it helps with the balance of salt, and it's a really, really great thing to save your brine. After looking at this, I feel like I need a little bit more cheese, so I'm going to do a second cut. All right, so I'm trying to keep it about the same thickness. All right. You can never have too much cheese. You can definitely have too little cheese. Okay, so I have a little pan with foil on the bottom, and that's where I'm going to put the cheese. Now, one of the key elements to this dish is really quality ingredients. We're not going to do a lot, but the ingredients have to be exceptional. So this is my favorite oregano. This is from the mountain of Taygetus. So technically it's not an island. It's on the Peloponnese in Greece, south of Athens. It's a beautiful area where the oregano grows wild. You'll find what's beautiful about Greece in particular are all of the islands have a lot of native flora and fauna, and they're able to stay very distinct because they're islands. And so you get some really unique varieties of herbs. And so you'll find several different varieties of oregano. Oh, it smells so good. So what I'm going to do is just fairly liberally top this with this oregano. Now, if oregano is not your thing, you could do a different type of herb. You could do a dried mint, which is a really classic herb of the area. You could also do a smoked chili flake, which is also really traditional in that area. Now, right now, this is the olive oil I have. Obviously with this, it's always great to use a Greek oil, but this is a very special French olive oil from Nice. It's a beautiful coastal oil. And the reason it's so special is it's unfiltered. And because it's unfiltered and such a fresh harvest, this is the oil that I'm using as much as I can until June. Because it's unfiltered, it's not going to last the full year that a traditional filtered olive oil will last. And the flavor is so pronounced and bold and strong and peppery. It's fabulous. And so I think that it's going to go perfectly with this dish. So give it a little drizzle on top. You're not drowning it in the oil. We're cooking this at a low enough heat, 350, that the quality of the oil is not going to suffer, but we are going to douse it with a fresh hit of olive oil once we pull it out of the oven. So we take our little package and now we just need to fold it up. So I like to connect the top a little bit. All we want to do is just prevent the cheese from drying out. And that's why we are creating this little bundle. And then put it in your oven at 350 degrees for about 10 minutes. And I'll show you what it looks like when we come out. Okay, so we're almost done. The feta is ready to come out of the oven. So it's just been in the oven for 10 minutes at 350. So all we wanted to do was gently warm it up. All right, so we just unbundle our little bundle. And you can see a little bit of moisture was expelled. It's warm, but it's still squishy. That's so, so, so important. So we're gonna finish off this dish. Let me see here. How do I wanna serve it? Put it on a little plate. So it's gonna be fairly warm and a little bit squishy. And then to really highlight the olive oil, give it a nice drizzle of olive oil. And that's your final dish. And you just eat it straight like this. You can have it with crusty bread. You can put it on top of fresh sliced tomatoes during tomato season, cucumbers. Oh, it's so good. The quality of the cheese is still there because you didn't bake it too high. The oregano really, really shines through. And then the olive oil just finishes it off perfectly. So that's it. My dog has a personality, especially if there's cheese around. So those are, I really wanted to highlight some really simple ways to manipulate some of these cheeses, but still let them shine. And, for me, cooking should be simple. You shouldn't need a lot of ingredients to make something incredible, but the quality of the ingredients have to be wonderful. So does anybody have any questions? All right. So unfortunately, no more guest appearances by my dog unless she runs down the stairs. But next up, we are going to move on to calcagno. Calcagno is one of my absolute favorite cheeses. So I really want you to look at the rind and, if you can, feel the rind. It should have an oiliness to it. If you look closely, it's going to have maybe a tiny bit of blue molding, definitely a little bit of white molding. And then the other thing that I want you to really observe is, do you notice? Okay, so you have the rind here, and then you have almost sort of like a shaded part here. that really highlights the aging process of this cheese. This cheese is Sardinian, and this is made by Casa Madeo. And this is also a multi-generation cheese-making family that it's a unique story because they started out in Sardinia. That's where the family lineage began. And they actually moved to Campania, which is mainland Italy. And so they're making cheeses in Campania and aging cheeses in Campania, but they're doing it with Sardinian sheep. Now, their one exception is this cheese Calcagno, which is actually still made traditionally in Sardinia, but then they are bringing it to their caves in Campania to age them. And I'll talk a little bit about their caves in a minute. But what is really common with a lot of island cheeses of the Mediterranean or coastal cheeses is this beautiful rind that is fairly smooth and clean, I would say, and thin. When you look at it, it really is thin. You know, when you think about a lot of rinds on like a Gruyere, or if you've ever had Pomme de Savoie, especially where they let that sort of natural mold go wild, you get a much thicker rind. With this, they're taking sea salt, which is an ingredient that's very prevalent and readily available in that area. And they want a cheese that's cleaner in flavor. And so how do you obtain that? You take that sea salt and you actually rub the outside of the cheese in it. You can also use olive oil or a combination of the two. What that does is it inhibits the mold growth. And when you continue to do that and care for the cheese in that way, you're basically protecting the cheese from external flavors of the molds, which would be developing if you allowed that cheese to kind of go wild with the natural molds in the cave. And when you let the molds go crazy, that's not a bad thing at all. So for example, the Tome de Savoie that I mentioned from France, they intentionally let the molds go wild and they pat it down. So it's just a different style of cheese making. This cheese, let me get a nice piece here. You'll see it has a beautiful texture to it. It has almost no eyes, which eyes are the holes that you find in the cheese. So you see, like, for example, Swiss cheese have a lot of eyes. That's a gas output during the aging process of the cheese. And typically, it can create a little bit more of a sour, slightly, sometimes a stringent flavor profile, but definitely a little bit more sour and less smooth and rich and heavy on the palate if you see those eyes. Now, when you don't see those eyes, typically that will indicate a cheese is going to be a lot richer and creamier on the palate. Does that mean that literally it's a creamy cheese? No, but it's going to highlight the fat content and kind of how it covers your palate. So this cheese, by the way, with this, great combo. This cheese, sorry, I took too big of a bite. What I love about it, so it's technically a pecorino, which is sheep's milk. And that's the Italian word for sheep's milk. And sometimes pecorinos can be very salty and very intense. This is a very intentional cheese in how they care for it and age it when it comes from Sardinia to Campania. Now, in Campania, they actually age their cheeses in the sort of cellar of a castle. And it's a beautiful compound where when you go into the cellar, there's various rooms. And, you know, it was originally several different sort of residences. And the idea was that you could trade cheeses through these cellars and underground tunnels. And it created the perfect environment for aging the cheeses, but also for facilitating trade amongst friends and family in the area. And so what this cheese really represents is a lot of what Sardinia has to offer. So you have salt and you have olive oil and you have sheep. And so all of those are really highlighted in the care of this cheese, the aging of this cheese, and the development of this cheese. And so I think it's Sardinian cheeses are very, very special. And this one in particular, I think, is very representative of its place of origin. So what do you all think about this cheese? This is one of my favorite cheeses. It has been for a long, long time. Thumbs up.
Really good. We like this one. Probably the best. It's really good.
Awesome. It's so unique.
It's great with the mousse syrup.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. And what's really fun is really taste the cheese and think about it when it gets closer to the rind. It tastes very different, this part of the cheese, than closer to the rind. And you can actually, because no matter how much you try to keep the cheese pristine and clear of molds and whatnot, it's going to develop a different flavor profile the closer the cheese is to the outside world. And the rind, all it really is old cheese. And so technically you could eat this rind, or I highly recommend cutting it off and saving it and using it if you're cooking white beans. It's really, really nice. It'll just add a really unctuous brininess. You do the same thing with Parmesan rinds. You can throw it into soups or stocks, and it's really great. But it's really fun just now, like when I was eating through this, it was like different cheeses. When you get closer to the rind, it's much earthier and a little bit farmier and heartier. So, okay, so now we're going off the coast of Spain. And so this is an island that is off the east coast of Spain, sort of southeast of Barcelona. And the island itself is a little island, Menorca, which is just east of Mallorca. And so this is a really special cheese called Mahon. And this is a very traditional cheese, extraordinarily traditional cheese that has been, it's a little bit, the sort of origin of cheeses and the history of cheeses is obviously debatable, but they have found ancient pottery that seems to be used, to have been used by cheesemakers or as cheesemaking tools in the BC era. And then also they have written documentation in the 5th century in this area of cheesemaking and cheesemaking traditions. So it's a cheese with a really, really rich history. It is, this is a cow's milk cheese, and the rind is treated a very particular way. So this cheese, Mahon, can be made either young or old, and this is the old version. And so the rind is rubbed in olive oil and pimenton. So you can see a little bit of that sort of red part. That's the pimenton kind of peeking through. And then when it's aged, it's frequently painted with a little bit of wax. And that wax helps to retain the aging of it. And so what makes this cheese unique is the fact that it's on an island, and that the cows are grazing on the native flora of the island. But then also, you'll find that this cheese has a really unique salinity to it because a lot of the plant life that they're grazing on have a naturally high salt content for being so close to the ocean. And that's something that's really fascinating that I love to explore. We used to have a cheese years ago from France where the cows grazed in salt marshes, and you bit into the cheese and it tasted like, it tasted like you're at the beach. It just had such a beautiful salinity to it. And it, what the animals are eating really, really, really does have a huge impact on the flavor of the cheese. And that's when we talk to cheesemakers, I always love to ask them how they journal about their cheese making, because it's not just about the cultures or the temperature in the make room. It's the temperature outside. What were the were the cows eating hay because they were forced inside because it was rainy or cold or wet? Were they eating silage? Are they eating wildflowers? If they're eating wildflowers, what type of wildflowers? And so when you get some really dedicated cheesemakers, they record all of this information, and they, because you have to wait, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years to actually get the end result. And, I definitely don't have a memory to be able to, recall what exactly happened, 16 months ago. And so it's a really great way, if they really love a batch, they can try to hone in on those aspects of it. And obviously part of it is letting nature take its course, but part of it is trying to kind of tinker and troubleshoot and really learn from the environment and the terroir, which is sort of the quality of the environment around you. So let's taste this together. So you can smell right away when you just smell the cheese. It does have sort of like that intense salinity. And because it's covered in wax, you'll see. Is there a cheese that this kind of reminds you of? Anybody? Kind of like a Gouda. And a lot of that is because of the wax treatment. And what wax does is good and bad, I think, depending on the usage. And this is a very thin wax. And what it does is it doesn't put the cheese in stasis. If a cheese is covered with too much wax, too thick of wax, it's not allowed to really breathe and live and develop. But with this, it's a thin layer of wax, so it's still able to mature and age, but it's able to retain that moisture. So when you bite into it and you get that sort of silky, almost sweet flavor profile, it really kind of balances out the salinity of the cheese nicely. But what do you all think of that one? Hopefully you like it. It's a really, really classic traditional cheese that we love to highlight. And that's all we have today. Unless you have any other questions, I hope you enjoyed the recipes. I hope you get to try them out. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can always email us at orders@fromageokitchen.com or me at julia@fromageokitchen.com. If you have any cooking questions or want a recipe or just want to troubleshoot something, more than happy to help. And yeah, let us know. Doing the recipe videos is a little bit newer this time around, so I hope you liked that.
You like that? Great.
Yeah?
Yeah, we like that. That was great. That was
Awesome.
nice.
Okay,
Good stuff.
Good. And my dog really likes to be involved as much as possible when I'm cooking and with cheese. So, but we'll definitely do more of those to basically highlight different ways, as when we get in. I don't want to talk about winter because we're just barely in spring yet, but maybe we can do some fondue and raclette classes as well.
Fun.
Awesome. But thank you so much for joining us. And we're very, very happy for you to participate in Voyage Fromage. And if you have any questions, let us know. And thank you again. Have a great night, everybody.